He wasn't born to rule. But he made Rome stand again. You want the eternal city. Come and bleed for it. Every sword strike echoes across time. He was no Caesar. Yet Rome remembers his name. Belisarius. Belisarius himself is said to have led the assault, his spear glinting as he vanished into the haze of Roman dawn. He did not need thousands, only timing, deception, and daring. From the walls, his men launched Byzantine incendiaries, liquid fire, perhaps an early form of what later became Greek fire, streamed down like molten vengeance on siege towers. Panic spread in Gothic ranks, not from defeat alone, but from not knowing how they were being defeated. Belisarius didn't fight like a Roman general. He fought like something older, something unpredictable. Procopius would later compare him not to Caesar, but to Archimedes at Syracuse. Like Archimedes, Belisarius turned geometry into defense, mathematics into destruction. He wielded fewer men, but more mind. The Goths, meanwhile, had no answer. Their confidence faltered. Their strength became confusion. Their siege became fear. Inside Rome, the morale shifted. After months of watching Belisarius outthink, outmaneuver, and outlast their besiegers, even the doubters among the Roman populace began to believe again. He wasn't just defending the city, he was resurrecting it. The walls no longer felt like tombstones of a fallen empire, but the living arteries of something defiant. One could ask, was this brilliance in battle, or madness with a purpose? Could a man like Belisarius have saved the Western Empire? Had he been born a century earlier, the city had endured the impossible. After nearly a year under siege, Rome stood isolated, its people hollow-eyed with hunger, its soldiers driven by discipline and desperation. The Goths, though bloodied, still surrounded the city like a tightening noose. Belisarius and his dwindling army had outlasted every wave. But no man, no matter how brilliant, could hold out forever. Then, on a cold Roman morning, something shifted. From the west, across the waves of the Tyrrhenian Sea, came the faint outline of sails. Dozens of them. Eastern sails, imperial sails. Reinforcements had finally come. General Narses, dispatched by Justinian, arrived through the liberated harbor of Ostia, bringing thousands of fresh troops and renewed supplies. For the first time in nearly a year, the siege lines were pierced, and the Romans inside felt the grip of fear finally loosen. It was as if the sea itself had whispered, "Rome will not fall." The arrival of Narses split the Gothic forces. They had failed to secure Ostia earlier in the siege, a mistake that now cost them dearly. They were forced to stretch thin across multiple fronts, trying to block new Byzantine troops in the west while still containing Belisarius in the city. Their cohesion began to crumble. By this time, supplies among the Goths were critically low. Foragers were ambushed. Morale was in free fall. Even the fiercest Gothic warriors began to ask, "Why are we still here? What city is worth this much blood?" But inside Rome, a new challenge was brewing. The arrival of Narses brought not just strength, but suspicion. In Constantinople, the court had begun to whisper about Belisarius, his successes, his popularity, his command of Rome itself. All of it made Justinian uneasy. Had he created a hero or a rival? Tensions flared between Belisarius and Narses. Orders were ignored, messages contradicted. There was no open hostility, but behind every military decision now loomed a silent question. Who truly commands this war? Despite the growing courtly distrust, Belisarius remained focused. He coordinated with Narses, but made sure his authority within Rome remained unquestioned. It was he, not Narses, who had bled with the city, who had lived its terror and led its defense. The Goths, sensing the divided leadership, made one final push, a night assault designed to break through the weakened western wall. But by now, Belisarius's countermeasures were reflexes. The attack was blunted before it began. Arrows rained, traps sprung, and the attackers were repelled with heavy losses. The siege, at last, began to dissolve, not with a final blow, but with a slow Gothic retreat, pulled back by exhaustion, hunger, and hopelessness. What they could not crush by force, they abandoned in frustration. From a strategic perspective, the relief from the sea saved Rome. But from a symbolic one, Rome was already saved by Belisarius. Yet back in Constantinople, that very truth unsettled the throne. How do you reward a man who's outshone your empire? And would history remember this as a joint triumph, or one man's defiance of collapse? For the first time in more than a century, Rome did not fall. The siege had ended, not with a grand victory parade, but with the slow unraveling of an army that had once thought itself invincible. The Goths, exhausted, starved, and broken in spirit, melted away from the walls. What they could not take by force, they could no longer justify pursuing. Rome was saved. The city was a shadow of its former self. Aqueducts shattered, granaries looted, its people gaunt and weary. But it still stood, and in the eyes of many, it stood because of one man, Belisarius. With only a fraction of the enemy's numbers, without steady supplies, without even the full confidence of the emperor who sent him, he had done what seemed impossible, held the eternal city against the tide. Inside the city, he was a legend made flesh. To the Roman populace, Belisarius was not simply a general. He was the last guardian of old Rome, the first in generations to defend her walls and prevail. Where so many others had fled, compromised, or been forgotten, he endured. But in Constantinople, the mood was far more complicated. Victory had been achieved. The campaign in Italy was ongoing. But as Belisarius's reputation soared, so too did suspicion at court. Whispers grew in volume. Would he remain loyal? Had he grown too powerful? Ministers once silent now openly questioned his ambition. After all, he had held Rome longer than some emperors had held the throne. Jealousy followed fame. Competing generals resented his command. Political rivals stirred Justinian's fears. And so, despite Rome's salvation, and perhaps because of it, Belisarius was recalled. No accusations, no disgrace, simply a summons to the capital cloaked in the language of honor. But everyone understood what it meant. Still, the legend could not be recalled. The people of Rome wept at his departure. Soldiers who had fought beside him spoke of his calm under fire, his fairness, his brilliance. Even enemies, like the Gothic king Witiges, would later describe him as a man unmatched in war. He had defended the city not just with tactics, but with symbolism, a reminder that the soul of the empire still beat in its western heart. Rome was held, and in doing so, Belisarius had reminded the world what Rome could be. Would history have remembered this siege so powerfully without the figure of Belisarius? And what do you think mattered more in the end, imperial loyalty or the love of a city? As the sun bled across the broken skyline of Rome, Belisarius rode out in silence. No fanfare, no triumph, only the distant toll of a cracked bell echoing across aqueducts that once brought life to an empire. Behind him, a city still stood, scarred but sovereign. He was not Caesar. He was not Augustus. But he was the only man in centuries to make Rome rise again. And yet, this empire he fought for never truly embraced him. In victory, he inspired awe. In power, he provoked fear. Justinian, who had once entrusted him with the fate of nations, now watched with suspicion, uneasy with a general who had proven he could wield power without a crown. The tension between greatness and obedience would haunt Belisarius for the rest of his life. In many ways, he was a living contradiction. The sword of the empire, who never sought to rule it. The savior of Rome, who would later stand accused in chains. A man used by history, then cast aside by it, and yet his shadow lingered. In the centuries that followed, whispers of Belisarius grew louder, not quieter. A general who fought not for glory, but for duty. A Roman in soul, even when Rome itself forgot what that meant. Would you call Belisarius a hero, or a tragic figure lost in imperial paranoia? And in your view, is loyalty to the state ever truly rewarded, or simply tolerated until inconvenient? If this story resonated with you, help keep history alive. Like, share, and subscribe for more untold epics on echoes of the past.